Act 1. In Chapter 1, Gideon Nav prepares to escape the Ninth House. She packs her belongings, meticulously checks her surroundings, and readies herself for a shuttle that will take her away. However, her escape is interrupted by Crux, a decrepit marshal, and Aglamen, her old swordmaster. Crux accuses her of theft and deception, while Aglameni warns her of the consequences of defying the Ninth. Despite their interference, Gideon remains determined to leave. The chapter reveals her mysterious origins, her strained history with the Ninth, and her relentless attempts to break free from the oppressive environment where she has been trapped since infancy. In Chapter 2, Gideon's escape plan is thwarted by Harrowhark, the Lady of the Ninth. Confronting Gideon moments before her shuttle arrives, Harrow manipulates the situation with a surprising offer: a commission in the cohort in exchange for Gideon attending a house muster. Gideon initially resists, but Harrow provokes her into a duel. Gideon underestimates Harrow, who has pre-planted skeletons in the field, overwhelming Gideon in a brutal fight. Harrow wins, forcing Gideon to fulfill the muster's demands. As the shuttle waits, Gideon's freedom slips away, leaving her trapped under Harrow's control despite her efforts to escape. In Chapter 3, Gideon is dragged to Drirber for a muster meeting after losing the duel to Harrowhark. In the eerie church filled with skeletons and Ninth House nobles, Harrow reveals an imperial summons. She and Ortis are chosen as candidates to become lictors, powerful servants of the Emperor. Ortis's mother protests tearfully, but Harrow silences dissent. After the service, Harrow confesses to sabotaging Gideon's escape by commandeering the shuttle for Ortis and his mother. Devastated, Gideon realizes she has been manipulated and abandoned once again, while Harrow admits she acted out of deep hatred, mirroring Gideon's own feelings. In Chapter 4, Gideon wallows in despair after her escape is thwarted, but Harrowhark interrupts her isolation with a proposition. With Ortis gone, Harrow demands Gideon act as her cavalier for the Lyctor trials, promising freedom and fortune if she succeeds. Gideon resists, distrusting Harrow and the Ninth's motives. Aglameni, the swordmaster, supports Harrow's plan, emphasizing that this is Gideon's only chance to leave the Ninth and gain freedom. Despite her reluctance, Gideon begins training under Aglameni, realizing that staying in the Ninth would mean certain stagnation or death, while leaving offers the faint hope of escape and purpose. In Chapter 5, Gideon and Harrow prepare for their departure to the First House, a remote planet where the Lyctor trials will take place. A new letter from the Emperor confirms the strict conditions of their participation. No attendance, no support, only the necromancer and cavalier of each house. Harrow emphasizes the need for the Ninth to appear competent and intact, even as they're falling apart behind the scenes. Gideon reluctantly submits to Harrow's strict demands, including traditional face paint and using a rapier instead of her preferred longsword. They set a tense, uneasy truce as they prepare to represent the Ninth. In Chapter 6, Gideon undergoes grueling training with Aglameni to master the rapier, progressing from incompetent to barely passable. Harrow is consumed by necromantic studies and logistical preparations, rarely engaging with Gideon. As departure day nears, the Ninth gathers for a somber send-off. Harrow announces that her parents have sealed themselves in perpetual penitence within the tomb. Gideon notices Harrow's emotional display during the farewell, contrasting with her own cynical relief at leaving. Boarding the shuttle, Gideon feels a mix of anticipation and triumph, ready to face the trials ahead and finally escape the Ninth House's oppressive grip. In Chapter 7, Gideon and Harrow arrive at the First House, a decayed but magnificent fortress on a water-covered planet for the Emperor's summons. The arrival introduces the First House's ancient priest, Teacher, who welcomes them alongside representatives from other houses, including a mysterious Third House trio and the ailing Dulcinea Septimus of the Seventh House, escorted by her overprotective cavalier Protesilaus. A tense confrontation occurs when Protesilaus draws his sword on Gideon after she helps the fainting Dulcinea. Harrow's cold diplomacy diffuses the situation, but tensions between houses remain palpable, foreshadowing the challenges ahead. In Chapter 8, Gideon and Harrow join the other necromancers and cavaliers at the First House's Canaan House, a decayed yet grand structure. They participate in an introductory gathering led by Teacher, who outlines the trial's stakes and rules. Participants must not open locked doors without permission. The ultimate path to lictorhood is left unexplained, causing confusion and frustration among the attendees. Gideon notices tensions among the participants, including the 7th and 3rd houses. At night, Gideon sees shuttles mysteriously falling off the landing platform into the sea below, hinting at ominous forces at play in Canaan House. Act 2. In Chapter 9, Gideon awakens in the decrepit yet ornate 9th quarters of Canaan House. Harrow has taken her iron ring and left instructions for Gideon to stay out of trouble and avoid interacting with anyone. Exploring the decayed mansion, Gideon finds a mysterious, locked, hidden door. Later, she encounters Magnus of the Fifth and his rude companions. Wandering deeper, she overhears a conversation between the arrogant Third House twins Corona and Ianthe and their cavalier Nibarius. Corona asserts dominance over Nibarius, while Ianthe coldly warns Gideon, who remains hidden, not to attract her attention. Suspicion and tension grow. In Chapter 10, Gideon navigates her new environment while Harrow remains absent. During a solitary midday meal, she encounters a hostile necromancer and his cavalier who ask her to leave. Frustrated, she explores the decayed 1st house, discovering a garden where she meets Dulcinea Septimus of the 7th house. Dulcinea charms Gideon with her delicate demeanor and sharp observations, asking her to demonstrate her swordsmanship. Gideon inadvertently reveals her inexperience with a rapier, raising suspicion. Dulcinea's keen interest unsettles Gideon, prompting her to flee the encounter, deeply shaken by the near exposure of her secret. In Chapter 11, Gideon adjusts to life in Canaan House, marked by isolation and rigorous solo training. Harrow remains distant, slipping in and out of their quarters without a word. Gideon reluctantly attends sparring matches organized by Coronabeth Tridentarius of the 3rd house. In the arena, she defeats Magnus V with ease and then faces Nibarius III, a technically perfect but arrogant opponent. Though Nibarius disarms her, Gideon turns the tables with a decisive strike, earning both admiration and scorn. Harrow observes Gideon's performance from the shadows before retreating, leaving their dynamic tense and unresolved. In Chapter 12, Gideon adjusts to her new routine, training alone and avoiding the other houses. Harrow remains absent from their quarters for days, prompting Gideon to search for her. Gideon stumbles upon Palamedes and Camilla of the 6th house investigating a sealed trapdoor in a forbidden area. Palamedes reveals that Harrow entered the space below and has not resurfaced. Using a key, they descend into a hidden laboratory and find Harrow unconscious, encased in a bone cocoon. Palamedes stabilizes her condition and advises caution, warning that the area is dangerous. Gideon carries Harrow back, beginning to grasp the house's secrets. In Chapter 13, Gideon returns Harrow to their quarters after finding her unconscious in a bone cocoon. Harrow reveals that she has been exploring an ancient, pre-resurrection facility beneath Canaan House, using skeletons to test necromantic challenges left behind. These challenges have destroyed her creations and left her exhausted. Harrow shares detailed maps and notes on the facility, including locked doors tied to the Lyctor trials. Gideon demands to join Harrow in her explorations, arguing that they must work together. Harrow reluctantly agrees, warning that the facility is profoundly haunted and dangerous, repeating ominous words from Teacher. In Chapter 14, Harrow and Gideon descend into the ancient facility beneath Canaan House to investigate a trial in Laboratory 2. Harrow demonstrates the repeated destruction of her skeletons by a regenerating, monstrous bone construct, but cannot directly perceive the threat. Gideon defies Harrow's orders and enters the test chamber herself, discovering the construct's regenerative ability and fighting it with little success. Harrow remotely connects to Gideon's senses, enabling her to analyze the trial. Harrow concludes the test requires filtering signal from noise, using a living mind. Exhausted but elated, Harrow identifies a path forward before collapsing from exertion. In Chapter 15, Harrow and Gideon receive an invitation to a 5th house dinner, which Harrow reluctantly accepts. During the dinner, Gideon observes the dynamics among the houses, while Harrow remains tense and withdrawn. Magnus and Abigail host warmly, and tensions between various houses subtly surface. After the meal, Harrow learns that Abigail inquired about accessing the lower levels of Canaan House. Realizing another competitor might gain an advantage, Harrow urges Gideon to move quickly to resume their Lyctor trial preparations, determined not to lose ground. The chapter underscores the escalating competition and Harrow's growing urgency. In Chapter 16, Gideon and Harrow succeed in defeating the bone construct by identifying and targeting its weak points under Harrow's necromantic guidance. Their teamwork is unexpectedly effective, with Harrow expressing admiration for Gideon's skill with a sword. The victory yields a new key, advancing their Lyctor trial progress. However, their elation is short-lived. On returning to the access hatch, they discover the gruesome entwined corpses of Magnus Quinn and Abigail Pent, shocking them and signaling a dangerous escalation in the competition at Canaan House. Act 3. In Chapter 17, attempts to resurrect Magnus and Abigail fail despite efforts from all necromancers, including a desperate and gruesome ritual by the 8th house. Harrow, exhausted, collaborates with Palamedes while tensions rise among the houses. Silas demonstrates his soul-siphoning ability, creating a chilling disturbance that affects everyone present, causing lights to dim and cold to seep into the room. Protesilaus intervenes violently, striking Silas. Teacher appears at the hatch in panic, warning everyone to remove the bodies immediately to avoid endangering themselves, as lingering in the chamber could invite catastrophic consequences. The urgency sets a foreboding tone. In Chapter 18, the houses struggle to remove Magnus and Abigail's bodies, storing them in a freezer. Tensions rise as Teacher warns of unseen dangers in the facility, declaring the area lethally hazardous and forbidding off-planet communication. Debate ensues over whether the deaths were murder or supernatural in origin. Palamedes suggests a scientific approach to investigate the bodies, while Harrow insists on maintaining the Ninth's independence. Silas performs a soul-siphoning ritual to revive Column, unsettling everyone. Jean Mary, distraught, seeks answers from Gideon, who offers her sympathy. Determined to stay ahead, Harrow presses Gideon to pursue their investigation immediately. In Chapter 19, Harrow and Gideon use their new key to unlock a sealed room tied to the Lyctor trials. Inside, they discover a preserved laboratory and living quarters, once shared by a necromancer and cavalier, with clues to the transference theorem. The room contains old relics, books, and personal items, hinting at its occupants' work and lives. Harrow copies critical information from a stone tablet to advance their understanding. The pair share a rare, tense moment of connection, acknowledging their need to trust one another. Later, Gideon finds a fragmented note while they glimpse the 4th House teens on a secretive mission. In Chapter 20, Harrow and Gideon descend into the facility to face a new necromantic challenge. Dulcinea Septimus of the 7th House proposes a partnership, revealing an experiment involving deadly overlapping fields of entropy and senescence. Harrow decides to attempt it, requiring Gideon's life energy to sustain her through the field. Despite immense pain, Gideon agrees, enduring a near-death experience while Harrow retrieves a key. Dulcinea offers comfort to Gideon during the ordeal. Harrow emerges victorious, but shaken, both from the trial and the cost to Gideon. They return to their quarters, exhausted but determined to continue the trials. In Chapter 21, Gideon wakes to find Harrow gone, leaving a series of notes warning her to stay put and rest. Camilla VI arrives to check on her, confirming she is inexplicably healthy despite the ordeal. At dinner, tensions rise as the group realizes the Lyctor keys are limited, and alliances or confrontations may become necessary. Coronabeth attempts to persuade Palamedes to help her, but he refuses. Later, Palamedes explains to Gideon that the Fifth's wounds suggest a necromantic attack rather than a fall. Their conversation is interrupted when they discover Jean Mary sneaking away, raising suspicions about the Fourth's potential danger. In Chapter 22, Gideon trains, bathes, and relaxes while Harrow is absent, only to find her later exhausted and unresponsive in bed. Isaac of the Fourth urgently summons Gideon to witness human cremains in the incinerator, suspecting another murder. Nabarius dismisses the teen's fears, but Coronabeth and Gideon agree there is real danger. Later, Camilla informs Gideon the duel between the 7th and 8th is cancelled, as the 7th are missing. They find Dulcinea collapsed outside in the rain, bruised and soaked, muttering that he never came back before fainting, leaving Gideon and Camilla alarmed. In Chapter 23, Protesilaus goes missing, and Dulcinea falls critically ill after attempting to walk alone. Human remains found in the incinerator reveal they belong to 2 individuals, both dead months before. Silas Octociceron confiscates Dulcinea's keys, justifying his actions as protective. The 2nd House initiates a duel with the 6th to claim their keys. Camilla defeats Lieutenant Dias in a brutal fight, securing victory but sustaining injuries. Palamedes berates Judith for escalating the key conflict and destabilizing alliances. Tensions rise as the duel highlights the growing chaos, culminating in an immediate challenge to the Sixth for their keys. In Chapter 24, Naberius' turn challenges the Sixth for their keys, but Harrow declares the Ninth will fight on their behalf. Gideon prepares to duel Naberius, but tension dissolves when Silas and Column leave, declaring they will search for the missing Protesilaus. Palamedes reveals that only one key remains unaccounted for, likely tied to Protesilaus, who hasn't returned from the facility. A plan forms. The Fourth House and Gideon will guard Dulcinea, while the Sixth and Harrow investigate the facility. Harrow entrusts Gideon with their keys, and alliances shift as mistrust and urgency escalate among the necromancers and cavaliers. In Chapter 25, Gideon, Jean Mary, and Isaac search the facility for Protesilaus. As paranoia and dread escalate, Isaac's necromantic senses detect an unsettling presence. They encounter a massive, grotesque, skeletal construct that attacks them. Despite Isaac's courageous attempt to destroy it, he is killed. Gideon rescues a grief-stricken Jean Mary and retreats to one of the locked study rooms for safety. Jean Mary, devastated, reflects on her loss before falling asleep. Gideon, keeping watch, briefly dozes off and awakens to find Jean Mary gruesomely murdered, impaled by bone spears, with a blood message written on the wall. Act 4. In Chapter 26, Gideon reels from the deaths of Isaac and Jean Mary. Dulcinea offers solace, sharing her perspective on life, death, and her role as a dying necromancer. Gideon confesses her inadequacies as a cavalier, but finds unexpected encouragement from Dulcinea. Later, Palamedes interrupts their conversation, and Gideon storms out. Encountering Silas Octociceron, she angrily rejects his cryptic invitation to discuss her past and the Ninth House. Haunted by guilt and nightmares of her failures, Gideon struggles to find peace. Harrow briefly comforts her, but Gideon remains tormented, sleeping armed and on edge. In Chapter 27, tensions peak between Gideon and Harrow. Palamedes proposes a collaboration, exchanging information on lictoral theorems and access to locked doors. Harrow and Gideon assist Palamedes in opening a blocked lictoral door, demonstrating Harrow's immense necromantic skill with Gideon's support. Discussions reveal a missing key and rivalries between the remaining houses. Harrow warns Gideon to avoid Dulcinea, sparking a heated argument where buried resentments and doubts explode. Gideon accuses Harrow of selfishness, and Harrow coldly denies Gideon's importance in the trials. Hurt and enraged, Gideon resolves to betray Harrow, cementing a rift in their fragile partnership. In Chapter 28, Gideon, fueled by frustration, approaches the Eighth House and meets Column and Silas. Silas confronts her with accusations about the Ninth House's past, including the mass death of children in Gideon's generation. Silas suggests the Ninth House's leadership orchestrated these events and questions its worthiness to produce a lictor. Silas demands Gideon's keys, but Column, bound by his sense of honor, refuses to betray his word to Gideon. This defiance creates a rift between the necromancer and cavalier. Column ultimately allows Gideon to leave with her weapons, warning her that their next encounter may end in violence. In Chapter 29, Gideon wanders aimlessly through Canaan House, avoiding her quarters. She encounters Teacher, who cryptically laments recent events. In the training room, Gideon finds Corona practicing with a sword, a rarity for necromancers. Their sparring is interrupted by Naberius, who panics and forcibly ends Corona's actions, hinting at deeper tension. Feeling unwelcome, Gideon retreats to the ninth quarters. Exploring Harrow's room, she finds a hidden box. Opening it, Gideon is shocked to discover the severed head of Protesilaus VII, adding another layer of mystery to the unraveling events. In Chapter 30, Gideon processes the shock of discovering Protesilaus' severed head in Harrow's quarters. Sharing tea with Palamedes, she confesses her traumatic role in Harrow's parents' deaths and their fraught history. Palamedes reassures her, dismissing self-blame. Harrow unexpectedly arrives, cuffed to Camilla, and admits she suspected Palamedes of the murders. Together, the group gathers in Dulcinea's room, where Dulcinea reveals Protesilaus was a beguiling corpse, animated through forbidden necromancy to hide her frailty. Tensions rise, but the group disperses with lingering mistrust. Harrow's fixation on Ianthe hints at further intrigue, leaving Gideon to follow her into the corridor. In Chapter 31, Harrow reveals long-hidden truths to Gideon in a saltwater pool, where the Ninth House's deepest secrets can be shared. She admits the Ninth orchestrated the deaths of 200 children to ensure her conception as a necromancer capable of opening the locked tomb. Harrow also confesses to breaking into the tomb as a child, discovering a chained, frozen girl inside, and deciding to live to guard it. Harrow expresses guilt over her cruelty to Gideon and asks for her loyalty if she dies. The chapter ends with their emotional reconciliation and a shared understanding of their intertwined fates. In Chapter 32, Palamedes, Harrow, Gideon, and Camilla infiltrate a lictoral laboratory, crafting a key from bone to gain entry. Inside, they find evidence of experiments on revenant-controlled skeletons and clues to a deeper mystery involving Teacher, revealed as a beguiling corpse, a vessel housing numerous souls. A fire alarm interrupts their investigation, leading them to discover the Second House team in a deadly confrontation with Teacher. Captain Judith, mortally wounded, reveals she sent an SOS to the Emperor. Teacher's dying words hint at a greater danger loose in Canaan House. The chapter ends with Judith staying to face her fate. In Chapter 33, the 8th House joins Harrow, Gideon, and the 6th House in investigating Abigail Pent's disturbed body. Palamedes deduces that a metal key, hidden within Abigail, had been surgically removed by someone, likely the 3rd House. This key could unlock a long-sealed lictoral room. Silas admits he previously took other keys to prevent others from misusing them, but now they must race against the 3rd to uncover what lies behind the sealed door. Meanwhile, Harrow identifies the furnace remains as belonging to Protesilaus and another unknown person. Palamedes emphasizes the urgency of addressing the living threat, but trouble looms ahead. In Chapter 34, the group discovers Ianthe in a Lyctor laboratory, having killed and absorbed her cavalier Nabarius to achieve Lyctorhood. Ianthe reveals the gruesome truth of Lyctorhood. Necromancers consume their cavaliers' souls to gain power. Silas and Colum confront her, but Ianthe demonstrates her newfound strength, defeating Colum and Silas in a chaotic, horrifying battle. Colum becomes possessed by a monstrous entity, killing Silas before Gideon intervenes. Ianthe ultimately ends the creature by snapping Colum's neck. She warns the group of greater dangers in Canaan House and disappears. Coronabeth, devastated, reveals her jealousy, lamenting Ianthe's choice to spare her. In Chapter 35, Gideon, Harrow, and Camilla discover Palamedes missing and trace him to Dulcinea's sick room. Palamedes confronts the woman masquerading as Dulcinea, revealed to be Cytherea I, an ancient lictor. Cytherea admits to killing the real Dulcinea and plotting to destroy the Emperor by dismantling the houses. Palamedes executes a self-sacrificial plan, unleashing his full necromantic power in a destructive burst to weaken her. Despite his efforts, Cytherea survives, revealing her regenerative abilities. She declares her intent to destroy the Emperor and the houses, beginning with Gideon, as the chapter ends in confrontation. In Chapter 36, a brutal battle unfolds between Cytherea, Harrow, Gideon, and Camilla. Harrow and Gideon fight alongside summoned skeletons to pin down Cytherea and her monstrous construct. Despite their coordinated efforts, Cytherea's power, regeneration, and manipulative tactics keep her dominant. Camilla and Ianthe intervene, with Ianthe temporarily trapping Cytherea in a blood net before being gravely injured. As the construct breaches Harrow's defenses, Gideon realizes they cannot escape. In a final desperate act, Gideon sacrifices herself on iron spikes, intending to empower Harrow to unleash one last effort against Cytherea and the construct. Act 5. In Chapter 37, Gideon, now merged with Harrow's mind, guides her to defeat the ancient lictor Cytherea I. As the construct is destroyed and Cytherea confronts them, Gideon aids Harrow in mastering the longsword and directing the fight. Harrow identifies the malignant force within Cytherea, a remnant of Palamedes' sabotage, and uses it to her advantage. Despite her fading presence, Gideon steadies Harrow to deliver a fatal blow to Cytherea's corrupted core. Cytherea dies, and Harrow, left devastated, removes Gideon's body from the spike. Gideon's smile lingers under the blue sky as Harrow grieves her loss. Epilogue. In the epilogue, Harrowhark awakens aboard a ship in space, devastated by Gideon Nav's death, whose soul now resides within her. She meets the Emperor Undying, who reveals the dire state of the Empire and the loss of most lictors in a long war against a persistent enemy. Despite her grief and reluctance, Harrow agrees to serve as a lictor under the Emperor, seeking answers about the fates of the missing, including Gideon's body. The Emperor promises to safeguard the Ninth House and guide Harrow as she steps into her new role as Harrowhark I.